So it's a pleasure to welcome Magdalena Siwek from Columbia now, but she'll be joining NYU CCBP this fall. Magda got her undergraduate degree at the University of Glasgow, and during that time she was a visitor at CCBP, so she's been there before. And she went on to get her PhD with Loris Hernquist at Harvard, and is doing great work. She's going to tell us about today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I've heard that you had a busy few months with faculty interviews, and so thank you very much for coming. So I want to talk about circumbinary disks, which are these structures that you can see on my title slide. So just for semantics, we have the circumbinary disk on the outside, and then we have these mini disks or circumsingle disks in the center that are forming around the binary components. And so this is just so we have the terms right. And what I want to talk about is how we run simulations of these systems and then make models that help us learn more about how binaries in the universe evolve. And I say binaries broadly because these simulations are actually scale-free. So a lot of what we learn from them can be applied to stellar binaries all the way up to massive black hole binaries. And most of what I'm going to talk about today is related to these massive black hole binaries and can be found in this paper that was accepted last fall. Okay, so we have a lot to get through. I want to start this talk by talking about circumbinary disk theory, and this is really a rundown of my thesis work. And I'll talk about how binaries evolve in these circumbinary disks, in particular how the mass ratio, semi-major axis, and eccentricity evolves. And then I'll make some inferences for binary populations, like I said, mostly massive black hole binaries, but we're also going to show some really tantalizing results for stellar binaries that some of you might be interested in. And then if we have time at the end, I will talk about some upcoming projects. I think that's going to be really nice to talk with you about because I'm going to be joining, like Andrew said, and a lot of this work that's upcoming is really very preliminary and will be evolving a lot in the next few months or years. And so I'll talk about the eccentricity attractor that you'll learn about, and then some things on massive black hole binary transients and stellar binaries again, but that is likely going to be time limited. All right, so I'd like to show this slide here. This is really a rundown of many of the simulations that have been done. Here. Oh, technical problems.
I just want to remove this.
Yeah.
It's okay, but no.
We have been.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, good.
Great. So I'd like to show this slide because it really shows the diversity and sort of acceleration of the field of circumbinary disk simulations. And I start with this paper from '94 by Timovic and Lubo. And if you follow the dates here, you can see both that there is an acceleration in papers in the field, a lot of them in the last few years, and also in the features in the circumbinary disks that are being modeled. We're starting really with simulations that simulate a few hundred particles all the way up to GR MHD simulations in the last few years. So there's been a growing interest in this field, and I think one of the drivers of this has been the strong evidence that we've had for a gravitational wave background from massive black hole binaries. And so people are very interested in learning about how these massive black hole binaries form and evolve and what the role of circumbinary disk driven evolution is. Let's see if I can. Yeah, okay. Okay. If I can move forward. We've been playing with this remote for 20 minutes now, and I thought we had it working, but I apologize for that.
Just use the arrows.
Yeah, I tried. It's been. Yeah, okay, I'll just click to go forward. And so here in this red box, I'm highlighting the suite of simulations that I ran during my PhD. I think we're kind of okay now. Sorry. And certainly for me, the interest in running this simulation suite was the growing interest in massive black hole binaries and the gravitational wave background. Okay, so I want to introduce this suite of simulations that I run during my PhD, because all of the results that you're going to be seeing the rest of this hour are really going to be based on this. So what we're looking at here is a subset of the suite of simulations that I run. We're looking at binaries with different mass ratio growing from top to bottom, and eccentricity growing from left to right. And so these are simulations that I run in 2D, Newtonian only. They're scale-free, like I mentioned, so the results can be applied to binaries in all kinds of scales. We're using a locally isothermal equation of state, so we don't have any sort of self-consistent pooling or anything like that. We're just implying some kind of equation of state. And then the binary is on a fixed orbit, actually. So while I'm going to be talking about orbital evolution, what I'm actually doing is I am getting all of these binaries and the disks into a steady state, and then inferring orbital evolution rates, and then sort of interpolating between the different simulation. And the reason that I do this is because it takes a very long time to get the Circumbinary disk into a steady state, the viscous timescale argument. And so we really want to run one simulation for a long time to know what that system would behave like in steady state, and then run this in various configurations to know what the parameter space is like. And then the reason you're not seeing the binary move on its orbit is because we're looking here at a snapshot cadence of 10 orbits. So the binary in these images here is always at apocenter, but obviously in our simulation output, we have much higher cadence information on the orbital evolution rate. Okay, so what are we actually getting out of this? From these simulations, we're getting evolution rates for the mass ratio Q, for the semi-major axis A, and for the eccentricity E. And I want to present sort of the three main takeaways that we get from observing these simulations. And the first one is that the mass ratio of these systems always increases. And when I say mass ratio, I mean the secondary or lower mass over the primary. So this is always less than or equal to 1. I know that's different in different fields.
So it becomes more equal.
Exactly. So the secondary actually proportionally accretes more than the primary, and this has been shown in various papers in the past, but we've extended this out to higher eccentricities as well. The second result is that the binary separation can either shrink or grow. So you can see the circumbinary disk sort of facilitating its spiral, or it can actually stall the binary or help it expand. And then finally, this has been shown a couple of years ago that the circumbinary disk actually induces a steady state eccentricity, and there's a sort of attractor in the eccentricity parameter space that all of the binaries move towards. And more recently, my work has shown that this is actually a function of mass ratio. So every binary with a particular mass ratio moves to a particular steady state eccentricity. All right. And so those three results can be shown in this plot that I like to show in my talks, where we again have eccentricity on the vertical and mass ratio on the horizontal axis. And then these streamlines indicate the way the mass ratio and eccentricity will evolve. And so these are all pointing to your right. So that's indicating the mass ratio growth. But then the colors here, the red and the blue, indicate whether the binary in that part of the parameter space will in-spiral or out-spiral. And so when I let this video run, you can see that this totally fictional binary population moves along these grid lines and ends up in the center of the plot at that attractor point. Okay. And while the binary systems move towards that attractor point, they're moving through phases of in-spiral and out-spiral, indicated by the colors. And so, yeah.
So the disk, like how many assumptions you have about the disk itself? Is this line changing depending on what you assume about the disk? Like some temperature, some thickness, I'm not sure exactly.
So these are 2D. We assume a H over R of 0.1, which kind of sets the locally isothermal equation state. So we're not using any sort of cooling. There's no radiation. It is really very simplistic, and this is why a lot of this can be used for binaries on various scales. But yes, you're right. There's a lot of there are a lot of assumptions. Are there any specific assumptions that you were curious?
So we said like the high scale height of 0.1, if you just put it to 0.15, this would just slightly shift this curve, or could you have
Okay.
like qualitatively different behaviors?
Yeah. So definitely we know that the semi-major axis evolution is more sensitive to that. The eccentricity evolution is actually less sensitive to that. I don't know if this paper is out yet, but I know that Alex Dittman has done some studies varying the scale height and has found that this relationship seems to hold. And I think I know why this is. Maybe we can talk about this later, but the eccentricity solution seems to be much more robust to many of these hydrodynamic assumptions. Yeah. Okay, so I think this is pretty neat because it allows us to go from this initially really random parameter space to pretty much a one-to-one relationship between eccentricity and mass ratio. I think so in my experience with numerical simulations, it's rare to get such a fun result. So I like showing this plot. Okay, so now that I've introduced this model to you, I want to talk about how this affects massive black hole binary populations. And first, I want to kind of guide you through the process of how we synthesize a massive black hole binary population, and then talk about all of these effects that the circumbinary disk has on mass ratio, semi-major axis, and eccentricity. Okay, so how do we synthesize a massive black hole binary population? So we actually use cosmological simulations for this, where we can track the evolution of individual galaxies. We know that these individual galaxies are populated by black holes of a given mass. And then as the cosmological simulation leads to hierarchical structure formation, we over and over again get information on the black hole pairs that should find each other in the post-merger galaxy. So that means that from this initial configuration of two separate galaxies, we end up with a post-merger galaxy where the two black holes are now at hundreds of parsec or kiloparsec scale of separation. But as you know, cosmological simulations are not able to reliably follow the evolution of these two massive black holes. So we kind of take this as input, and we end up with a binary population with particular masses, mass ratios, separations, which are typically at kiloparsec scales initially, and then populate this across redshift. And so then we came up with this framework. So the code that we're developing is called Holodeck. It's part of the Nanograph collaboration, and I've been a co-developer there for a couple of years now. We take these pairs of massive black holes, we evolve them in their galaxy through dynamical friction at kiloparsec scales, stellar scattering processes in the galactic bulge, circumbinary disks, which is the new component, and then gravitational wave hardening. And so you can imagine that we do this for every massive black hole binary that forms across the redshift space, and therefore we get information on the population statistics across redshift. And so I want to zoom in now on this parsec scale stage of the evolution, where we look at circumbinary disk driven evolution and have this really complex set of equations that governs the semi-major axis, eccentricity, and mass ratio evolution. Okay, so first I want to talk about the mass ratio. So initially, if we just leave all of our mass ratios as they are from the cosmological simulations, it would look something like that. So the fairly flat mass ratio distribution for the binary systems that reach the Pulsar Timing Array are also LSST frequency space. And that relationship here is really just governed by, again, hierarchical structure formation and about depends on how many binaries reach that final parsec where we can observe them. But if we allow for some accretion from a circumbinary disk, we see that this tail here sort of tapers off, and we get a slightly higher median mass ratio. And if we allow for higher accretion rates, so we're testing here 1% Eddington or 10% Eddington, you can see that really there's a pretty noticeable difference in
This is the accretion rate of gas onto the black hole.
Yeah, that's the combined accretion rate. So it's sort of sets how much is set by how much gas is available for the accretion disk as a whole.
Somehow I imagine that that would be kind of well constrained observationally, but you're saying it's not?
So in cosmological simulations, the accretion rate is sort of fine-tuned, I think, to yield a black hole mass function that
Right, you wouldn't want to
It's
trust the
agreeable.
cosmological simulation, but isn't there data on the amount of gas?
I don't think it's that well constrained. I think it'll depend on the host galaxy, right? So
I mean, I would have thought there was some sort of known distribution, but I could just obviously be wrong.
yeah.
I mean, to the extent that there's a known distribution, it's very broad, right? There's a small number of things with F-ed of 0.1 and but then a large, a rising distribution as you go to lower and lower.
Yeah, and I guess it'll depend also on the galaxy type, right? If we have really large
Yeah. I just am a little surprised that
yeah,
there aren't observations on that, so.
right.
Or, I mean, I agree it's complex,
Yeah,
but I would have thought this was the sort of thing people would have tried to measure.
yeah. So one of the reasons that we're testing these different parameters is because because future observations will then help us constrain what the average could be, right? So if we end up seeing a really flat distribution, that could mean something about hierarchical structure formation. It could also mean that we just don't form these circumbinary disks, or they're really not important. Okay, so for mass ratio distributions, at least there's already a noticeable shift, even at 10% Eddington sub-parsec scales. And we've done tests where we looked at the mass distribution of the black holes themselves, and because it's such a short period of time during the evolution, we're not seeing crazy high masses in the distribution. So this is all within reasonable bounds. Okay, so I want to next talk about the semi-major axis. If you have been following this field at all, you will know that the semi-major axis evolution from circumbinary disk models has been undergoing some kind of revolution. There's been a lot of discussion on whether the circumbinary disk helps the binary merge or actually prevents it from merging. And so I really want to go into a bit of detail here. Okay. So to start with, I want to show you this plot, which shows the semi-major axis rate of change, the inverse of that actually, as a function of the binary separation. And I'm showing 4 different lines here. I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, it kind of disappears there a bit, but the blue line here shows the gravitational wave-driven evolution, which is really important at 10⁻² parsec or less. The green is the circumbinary disk-driven evolution. Red is the stellar driven semi-major axis evolution. And then at large scales, over here at kiloparsecs, we are pretty much completely dominated by dynamical friction. And so this is our fiducial model here that is really summarizing the evolution rates of the entire population of massive black hole binaries that we've synthesized in this way. And what you can see here is that the small, really small period when a circumbinary disk-driven evolution is important at all is really very, very small. So there's really not much of a contribution of circumbinary disk-driven in spiral rates. So now let's, crank up the accretion rates a bit. By cranking up the accretion rates, we're essentially inferring higher surface densities in the disk, which increases then the magnitude of the torque the binary experiences from the gas. And by doing that, we're seeing a higher, a larger effect from the circumbinary disk driven in spiral. And as you can see, this is at subparsec scales. And then as we move towards the gravitational wave dominated regime at 10 to the -2 parsec and below, there's actually, I'm gonna use my fingers. So you can actually see that the semi-major axis right here from the circumbinary disk dips into the positive, right? Because this is the inverse of A dot. And so this is because at that point in the evolution, the binary has become circular. And it turns out that for circular binaries, the circumbinary disk prefers an outspiraling or expanding solution of the semi-major axis. So since this happens here, I wanted to test if there's any significant impact of this on the gravitational wave background, right? So by synthesizing this this population of massive black hole binaries, we can obviously make some kind of inferences on the gravitational wave background signal. And
It
so
looks like it's so dominant to the gravitational wave.
yeah, that's what I'm going to show you.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely, yeah, it is. You can already see this here, right? The
So maybe I was missing
magnitude
something.
is absolutely subdominant. But we didn't know this, right? So when the results came out that circumbinary disks might actually drive the outspiral, it was unclear whether this will have a significant effect on the population and also on the gravitational wave signal. So what I want to show you here is the gravitational wave background strain as a function of frequency. And I'm going to be contrasting this signal for different populations evolved in various different ways. And as you know, as a guess, the softening or outspiral from the circumbinary disk is going to be minimal. So what I'm comparing here is in blue, the gravitational wave background signal from a population of black holes that was not at all touched by any circumbinary disk. And in orange, I'm showing my fiducia model where we are allowing for this 10% Eddington accretion and pretty much all of the circumbinary disk-driven evolution rates, except we don't allow the disk to expand the binary. We're just testing for that separately. And as you can see, As you can see, there is an increase in the overall amplitude. And the reason for that is that the mass ratios of the populations have increased, and therefore the chirp masses and the gravitational wave strain is higher. And then if I take the same model, same as this orange one here, and I just allow the softening to occur, then you can see that there's almost no difference. So even though we're now allowing the disk to expand the binary separation, there's really hardly any difference. So next, we're going to go to our limiting case at 100% Eddington, where again, you can see the mass ratios increase, therefore the strain has increased. And if we then allow for softening in this model, we do see a modest effect on the gravitational wave background, but almost counterintuitively, right, it's actually a positive effect. So we're actually seeing a small increase in the gravitational wave background amplitude because we're allowing the disk to expand the binary. And this is really because the binary is living longer in that subparsec regime. It's allowed to accrete longer, and it's also allowed to live longer in each frequency bin. So it's a really modest effect. We're basically saying here, don't worry about circumbinary disks. They're not going to take away our gravitational wave background signal. If anything, they're going to slightly increase the amplitude of that.
It looks like a modest effect, but could it be like actually important and says it's more frequency dependent versus the other one is just some overall shift?
Yeah, we look
more degenerate. The mass to assume in the first place.
So are you asking if maybe there's a change in the power law? Because it's frequency dependent. Yeah, we looked into this a little bit, but it's just such a small effect that there is really there isn't much to see or observation.
It's not measurable.
Yeah. right? Yeah, so it's really a very, very modest effect, and what's dominant there is really the extended period of time spent in the accreting phase at subparsec scale. So it's really the increase in the mass ratio that's driving this slight offset there. Okay. So next, I want to talk about the eccentricity evolution. And so again, I'm going to really zoom in on this parsec scale part of the binary evolution, and I'm going to show you how the eccentricity of the population changes as we allow circumbinary disks to torque the binary. Okay, so here I'm showing as a function of a gravitational wave frequency emitted at that particular point in the evolution, the eccentricity of the population. And so these are really medians with some confidence interval around it. In orange, again, we have our model that hasn't seen any circumbinary disk evolution. And in green, is there a stick that I could use to point? Because
It's been stolen.
okay,
It's sad.
okay.
I bought it in a
There's a light.
hardware store once.
I think the battery in this is a bit low, so it's kind of
There might be
dies.
another one.
The other one was green, I think, was
Yeah.
better.
Oh, okay. I think we went took this.
You took the other one. Okay.
Yeah,
Stolen.
that's okay.
Two parts, I'm sure. I'm sure that somebody just taken it to some other conference room.
All right, I'll just point and you'll see what I mean. So if we compare these two populations, right, the green one, which has been through some circumbinary disk-driven phase, and the orange one, which hasn't, you can see that as the binaries reach roughly parsec scales, which are 10 to the minus 11 hertz or so, the binaries start to increase in eccentricity in the green line. The orange line stays pretty much flat. And then as we move through the LSST and PTA bands, these eccentricities decay due to gravitational wave emission. But we see a notable difference in the median eccentricity of the two populations. And then something else that's really interesting happens here. If we divide our population into different mass bins, and so the darkest blue is the highest mass bin, the light blue is the lowest mass bin, you can see that these lines are all offset from each other, right? So the higher.
I'm sorry, you explained it, but it didn't go into my brain. What did PTA and LSST, why is that a label?
So I'm just showing the frequency band in which the PTA the spectrum was shown previously.
Okay.
So this is sort of where
Right,
the
with
binaries.
LSST, I mean,
Oh, okay. So the LSST one is really inferred by saying we'll need to see a few cycles of the binary in order to infer that any particular AGN is a binary AGN.
okay, just the
Yeah.
identification of a binary using.
Exactly.
Sorry, I'm
So all of the binary
slow
systems that are within that frequency range where you could,
I
using LSST.
Okay, sorry.
That's fine. Absolutely. Yeah, I can see that, this is a multi-messenger. So if we then compare binaries in different mass bins, again, the dark blue is the highest mass, light blue is the lowest mass. You can see that these are offset from each other, right? And so the reason for that is that the circumbinary disk-driven model is actually independent of mass, but then the gravitational wave-driven evolution depends on mass, right? So the highest mass binaries will circularize first, lowest mass will circularize last, and so we get this nice offset here, and you'll see this again later in the talk. Okay. And now I want to make some comments on initial conditions, right? Because we're evolving a whole binary population here. We actually want to test whether these results are dependent or independent of initial conditions. And so I want to mention that we actually don't know anything about the eccentricity distribution of massive black hole binaries as they form. I've seen some papers where people have, merged two galaxies and then wanted to say something about the initial eccentricity of the binary as it forms in the galactic bulge. But it seems that even very, very small differences in the initial conditions of the binary merger really make a huge difference for the final eccentricity at which the binary is bound. And so we really don't know. So we're testing a few different parameters here. Here is a population where we've initialized the eccentricity of the binary at formation. It's 10 to the -4. And so if we compare models without circumbinary disks, this is the dashed line, and with circumbinary disk accretion, you can see that there is a difference here. The no circumbinary disk model here actually increases in eccentricity due to stellar scattering, which is a very modest effect, and you'll see that that becomes negligible later on. So say we do this again, and we increase the initial eccentricity to 10 to the -2. Yeah. So then we see that the two solid lines converge, right? And if we do this again at high eccentricities, here we say, well, the binaries form at 10 to the -1. And here we let everything form at 0.9 or so. The model without circumbinary disks, they're all over the place, right? The eccentricities that are measurable here, they're within a few orders of magnitude from one another. But with circumbinary disks, we're essentially erasing these initial conditions because the eccentricity evolution is just strong enough to erase whatever initial eccentricity you've given the binaries. And so that's pretty neat because it kind of erases a clear uncertainty in our population studies. Excuse me, it's really dry here. Okay, all right. So we're really erasing these initial eccentricity distributions and eliminating a very clear uncertainty in our models. And so lastly, I want to show something that I think, again, is really fun. If we're, a bit optimistic and we think about LSST in upcoming transient surveys, if they're able to measure eccentricities and mass ratios of binary AGN candidates, we might be able to make plots such as this, where we are able to plot mass ratio against eccentricity for a sample of the binary population. And so what I'm doing here is I'm evolving our binary population with initially randomized eccentricities through the two familiar channels, excluding and including circumbinary disks. And so this thing here shows you the gravitational wave frequency that the binaries are at this particular point in time. So at this point, they're still a bit too low frequency to be detectable by any multi-messenger approach. But then as they're getting to the nanohertz regime, we're expecting to see these things. And as you can see, the binaries here are in a completely different order than the binaries here, right? And we see this nice waterfall feature here, which indicates the mass of the black hole binaries. And you can again see that the highest mass black holes at 10 to the 9 in blue are at the lowest end of the eccentricity range, whereas the lowest mass binaries are still on the eccentricity versus mass ratio relationship there. So this attractor seems to be clearly present, especially in the lower mass population. Okay, and so this is obviously very reminiscent in the circumbinary disk model that I showed in the beginning. Okay, great. So I want to show some a really fun paper that was that came out recently, and it's actually observations of stellar binaries. So as we know, binaries, stars form in binaries quite often, and sometimes if you're lucky, you get these observations from ALMA where there's a real binary forming in a disk. So there are observations like this where we actually see circumbinary disks in action. And a recent paper by Alan Murray and Paul Duffel, I think a lot of you probably know Paul, Andrew definitely does, has actually gathered some of that data and plotted it on this eccentricity versus mass ratio plot here. And I'm going to point out to you the binaries that are relevant here. These are just, I think, 8 data points. And these are all binary systems that are in formation and are coplanar with their circumbinary disks from which they're forming. And they're at least saying that this is some pretty interesting, tantalizing evidence for potentially a Circumbinary disk-driven eccentricity evolution in these systems, which seems to match what hydro simulations have suggested. So that's really interesting. Hoping to do more with that in the next few years. I think Gaia binaries would be a great way to test more about this. Okay, so I want to summarize the first part of this talk. So I've shown you this really fun eccentricity versus mass ratio relationship that's driven by circumbinary disks, and also that this might actually be present in massive black hole binary populations. I've shown you that this circumbinary disk-driven softening has a very small effect on the gravitational wave background, but actually that the mass ratio growth due to accretion actually does have a fairly significant impact. And finally, that the mass ratio distribution of a massive black hole binary population will be much more strongly peaked, see that here, towards 1 if circumbinary disk accretion is significant. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some upcoming projects that I'm planning to work on. So the first one is something I'm really excited about right now, and it's pertaining to this eccentricity attractor that we found in our simulations. Namely, we have this really nice model of eccentricity and mass ratio and how they evolve in circumbinary disks. But the question is how, and I'm going to say that this is really very preliminary work, as it's really more of a game plan and things I'm planning to do in the next few months, and also while I'm here. So happy to discuss any of this later if anyone's interested in getting involved. So why is this happening, right? To kind of ease into it, I first want to show you a video of one of my simulations where instead of plotting the surface density of the disk, like what you're used to from previous plots, I'm showing how each of these gas cells in the disk would evolve the binary eccentricity. Okay, so I'm going to let this sink in. So wherever the disk is blue, those cells would act as a circularization, would act to circularize the binary orbit. And wherever the disk is red, the opposite happens, right? So these cells, they're density weighted and they're essentially acting to either circularize or boost the eccentricity of the binary. And so we calculate this by simply tracking how the energy and the angular momentum would be changed as these gas cells torque the binary. And one thing that we've already found is that actually this first term here, the accretion term, is completely negligible. So this is not an effect that that depends on accretion. It also isn't an effect that depends on the inner part of the disk. So we can essentially cut out the inner part of the disk and only allow the outer circumbinary disk to interact with the binary and get the same attractor eccentricity. So it seems to be something that is pretty far away from the sink and therefore less sensitive to numerical assumptions in that way. So we can essentially cut out this part and we get the same attractor eccentricity. So unfortunately, the spatial gas distribution doesn't really reveal anything about why the net eccentricity rate of change is either positive or negative. So what I'm thinking about is whether the power spectrum of E dot might tell us something. To show you what I'm currently doing to assess that, I'm looking at two binary systems, one in red up there and one in blue below, where one of them is decreasing in eccentricity and one is increasing in eccentricity. Would like to point at these, but I cannot. So the red one up there is going down, right? So the eccentricity is decreasing, and the blue one there is doing the opposite. And so I can show you the time series here of the eccentricity rate of change, where in blue, we're looking at the binary system that is growing in eccentricity, and in orange, the binary is circularizing. So we can see that over these 10 orbits, there is a difference in the mean value of E dot. But why is that, right? And we're thinking that this could be a resonant effect. And so to get a bit more context here, I wanted to show you this plot here where I am showing a binary and a circumbinary disk in all of these 3 panels. And then I'm plotting the outer Lindblad resonance on the left, inner in the middle, and the co-rotation resonance on the right. And some classical papers, Goldrick and Tremaine and others, have indicated that such resonances can actually lead to an increase or a decrease in the eccentricity. And what makes this really complicated is that in the circumbinary disk simulations, the density of the gas, right, the gas morphology is really hard to model analytically, right? We can't just plug something into these Goldrick and Tremaine models and expect to come out with a solution for our attractor eccentricity. So what we need to do is we need to test how this really unique gas distribution around the binary is exciting these resonances, and therefore maybe understand why certain binaries increase in eccentricity and others decrease in eccentricity. And so I've recently had some potentially interesting results here where I've plotted a power spectrum of such a binary system. This is the 0.3 eccentricity binary where eccentricity is growing. And contrasted that with a binary system where eccentricity is decreasing. So that binary here is circularizing. And what I found is that there are these outer Lindblad resonances that are really visible. Where's the stick? Okay, I'm gonna point. So if you look at these peaks here, these are actually in line with frequencies that are excited by outer Lindblad resonances. And these are also possibly main drivers of eccentricity growth in these classical papers. And so these peaks here in the power spectrum for the lower eccentricity binary are not present in binaries that are actually circularizing. So for reasons that are likely to do with that gas morphology in the disk, these resonances are potentially not excited, and they're leading to that attractor eccentricity.
This is the power spectrum of E dots as a function of
Yes, yeah, yeah, that's right. And so potentially that absence of some of these peaks here, which do coincide with certain resonances, is potentially what's leading to that difference or that change in the sign of E dot. But why that is, again, is likely due to the difference in the circumbinary disk morphology, which, as you saw, changes with binary parameters. So it is a really convoluted problem. I'm going to chat with Andrew later, and I'm also interested to hear any thoughts that you might have about some clever numerical tests that we could do to get a clearer picture of this. Okay, how am I doing for time?
Great, you have 15 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Just to understand, you said that it was the outer disk that torques the binary.
The outer disk is dominant.
So
Yeah.
can you do perturbation theory to this outer disk? Like figure out given because the binary is doing something to the disk which then back reacts to torque it. Is that the idea?
Yes, right. So the binary is exciting eccentricity in the
Suppose it's
disk,
the disk.
and it's also causing it to precess, although not always. So the reaction of the disk to the binary also depends on the binary parameters.
So if it's only the outer, because of course the center part looks very messy, but if it's only the outer parts, can you do linear perturbation theory to figure out the response of the disk to the binary and then how it will back react on the binary?
I haven't thought about that. Do you mean like do that in a simulation, sort of inject some kind of perturbation into the disk as I'm running the simulation?
Or, I mean, I have no idea about what exactly goes on in these disks, but if it's some kind of analytic based model, can you are there like analytic perturbation theory of these thick disks?
I'm not sure. The problem I see with this is that because the gas is governed by the binding potential, any perturbation that you give it, it's gonna disappear pretty quickly. That's my initial
To disappear.
guess. Sorry,
What do you mean exactly?
I'm just saying that I think the disk would sort of go back to its original state pretty quickly.
But it's based on
But
the
it's
genes length or
temporary.
something?
Sorry,
It's based on like the genes length of the. This, I guess, like, if it's ready to collapse versus the pressure that's, let's say, make it expand out, I guess.
so
There's
we're,
probably some length scale, right, that is associated with whether.
oh,
sorry.
okay, so we're not allowing any self-gravity in the disk.
Okay.
So if we did, that might change the picture. So the gas only feels the binary, it doesn't, individual gas cells are not
Okay.
subject to any sort of self-gravity, so they couldn't collapse. Yeah,
You said any perturbation would go away, but here you have a constant
Mhm.
forcing, right? The binary is constantly perturbing the disk.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, this sounds interesting, maybe that's a good idea. Do you have time later? We could
Sure.
chat.
I have to check my-
I know you have a faculty meeting this afternoon, so I don't know how much time people have, but yeah, so if there's a bit more time, I will very briefly mention a couple of other projects that I'm currently doing. So the first one is really related to transients. I've alluded to this a bit earlier, where I said that, well, maybe future transient surveys are able to actually probe the massive black hole binary population to some detail and help us infer something about their circumbinary disk driven evolution. And so the way we do this really is we look at the binary system and we record the total accretion rate onto the binary as a function of time. And as we do this, we can see that there's really up to 2 order of magnitude difference in the absolute, the total accretion rate onto the binary. And I'm contrasting here 2 different binary systems. So 1.5 eccentricity and equal mass ratio, and then another one with, some randomly picked values of eccentricity and mass ratio. And you can see that the signature here that the accretion rate at least has is very different, right? And so you can do this then for a bunch of different binary systems. The uncertainty is how that total accretion rate is processed into any luminosity and any sort of visible signature that we might be able to detect with telescopes. But if we simply use this as a proxy, we can come up with this model for the accretion variability, at least, over that parameter space of eccentricity and mass ratio. And so right now I'm working on an emulator that is able to interpolate between these different models and sort of on demand spit out an accretion rate time series for binaries within this part of the parameter space. And so this will be used by been chatting with the LSST Astro working group. They're interested in using these as a starting point for templates that they're going to be using to look for binary AGN. Obviously, there's a lot that isn't captured in these models, right? So they're the experts in modeling the AGN part of this more, but it's definitely a starting point to understand more about the periodicity in these AGN-like curves. Okay, and then finally, I want to just get back to this really tantalizing plot here. I'm really interested in doing this analysis with Gaia binaries, in particular, looking at different stellar mass spins and looking at, maybe different metallicities and other things that might actually show this signature. If we look at all of the Gaia binaries, we don't seem to see this, right? But maybe there are certain subpopulations within the Gaia binaries that do show this signature, and that could indicate something about their history, right? So if we see the majority of binaries don't show this, but some do, it might teach us more about how these systems form, and whether disks are present for a significant period of their birth. Okay, so with that, I think I'm actually under time. So I'm giving you all 10 minutes more from your day. I want to thank my collaborators, and also I'm excited to join you in the summer.
There are questions for Magda?
Can you put up that periodicity plot, the light curves again?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, these are very distinctive in shape. Should I be understanding this as something akin to what you would expect to, to see? Like, these aren't like, these are kind of sawtoothy.
Yeah. Yeah, so these so in this part of I don't know if you can see the pointer here, but especially the equal mass and sort of low eccentricity binary systems have this sawtooth pattern. It's related to the structure of the circumbinary disk, which forms this kind of lump that orbits at a 5 binary period. So the sawtooth is really at a 5 binary period. So yes, they are very distinct, and this is what really drives this this project, because with an emulator you might be able to then infer also the binary parameters of a variable AGN.
Are there, I guess I'm embarrassed I don't know. Are there cases known of things that look like people interpret as binaries, like quasars that are variable that they think are like this?
I know of one that is, I'm not sure what the current state of this is, but there's this one that's called Spiky. I actually don't know who's speaking.
It's Mike
Oh, this is Mike Blanton. Sorry.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
I'm kind of speaking to the ceiling right now, so
Yeah, sorry.
that's fine. So there's this one system called Spiky that has this really strong feature in its luminosity that kind of shoots up and down. There's been some papers on this thinking that this might be due to lensing as well, but it could also be an eccentricity feature. I'm not sure what the current state of this is, but I'm sure we're not going to have any dearth of data from LSST, right? Like once we have data from these upcoming surveys, we're probably going to see more of this. I was at a workshop last month in Aspen, and we actually had an afternoon session where we discussed this question: do we actually have any really good binary AGN that we're all really confident that they're binaries? And the answer was no. So there's just so much uncertainty in the AGN part of this, right? Like the disk can show this periodicity in itself, that people are very cautious.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be a lot more time domain observations of quasars after LSST starts, but there's not a small amount now. I mean, how rare do you, like, theoretically, how rare does one expect this phase to be? Like, is a quasar in this phase 1/millionth of its time, or 1/billionth, or 1,000th, or what?
Yeah, so the total, so this is extremely dependent on the host galaxy properties, but I'm going to give you very ballpark figures. From the population statistics that we've done, the ballpark figure there is that the total evolution of a dual AGN down to merge is roughly a giga-year or so. Can be a few hundred giga-years, but call it a giga-year. And then in the final parsec, it's a few, like tens of millions typically, but again depends totally on the mass ratio of the system. So it is a pretty short period of time related to the overall evolution rate. Does that answer your question?
Well, but yeah, so if every quasar did this once in its lifetime, it would be something like 1 in 1,000.
I don't
Like-
think it's
Like if once in every 10 billion years, if it's 10 million years long and every quasar undergoes it, then it's sort of in the 1,000ths, right?
Yeah, I think there was a paper that suggested that it was sort of like sub 1% to 1%. But I'm not sure if there has been follow-up work on this.
Yeah, because we have, I mean, there are certainly thousands of quasars with pretty high cadence monitoring photometrically at this point.
So high cadence, but also baseline is a really important factor there, right? We need high cadence, but we also need a long baseline.
Meaning 10 years is not enough.
10 years is okay, but you probably want to see, 5 binary periods. So then at that point, you'd be limited by the 2-year binary period. So
Got it.
yeah, I think Jenny Green has done some work on this, and lots of others have. But it's just really hard to filter out the false positives.
Yeah, red noise. There's lots of things about red noise tricking you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
So Gladys, you had a question.
I had a question, going back to the, when PTA or nanogram, I want to say, first showed their signal, there was a discussion that the signal was, I think, too big or too small or something with the simulations of those days, but they weren't taking into account this kind of stuff. I don't think. I'm just curious from your perspective, how that has evolved.
Yeah,
I haven't followed it.
yeah, so it's an interesting question. The signal is much stronger than expected, and these accretion models, they're not doing much to alleviate this
Okay.
problem, this discrepancy. I think there was work out of Princeton that was also suggesting the absolute maximum signal that you could possibly get given observations of black holes in the low redshift universe. And they said you cannot, even if you're super optimistic, you cannot get that kind of PTA signal. And we've had a discussion on this in Aspen last month, and if I remember correctly, so people are really thinking about this and very intrigued by this. And one suggestion is, well, maybe we're getting the black hole masses somewhat wrong, right? Like we don't know. We're really out of answers at this point.
So these are, when you say they're getting the black hole masses, you mean the distribution, because you're not trying to see individual ones, I guess. Is that-
So maybe we need to, so what people were saying, again, this was just discussion from the conference, was that maybe we're just not inferring the correct masses, the mass function of the black holes, and maybe they're actually more massive than what we think they
Do you
are.
know how much it would have to change to fix it?
I don't know. But it is a substantial offset, right? It's not just, it's not nothing. It is pretty substantial offset in the amplitude expectation.
Like a factor of 2 or something, or?
I can't remember exactly, but it is a factor of a few at least, yeah.
It has particle theorists really excited.
Yeah, so
It's
again,
actually a discrepancy.
maybe it's a combination of a few things, right? Because we also have uncertainty on the parallel, right? So the index, we're not seeing exactly the parallel index that we're expecting. So maybe we are getting a background from massive black hole binaries, but maybe we're getting something on top of that as well.
Is the parallel index flatter or sharper?
It seems to be just a wee bit flatter than what's expected, remember correctly. So so that might indicate environmental effects, right? But we're not sure. Yeah.
Maybe
Could you go back to that plot with the distribution again of the mass ratios?
I will try. Bear with me.
I didn't grasp what that last plot was. Is it just the luminosity as a function
It
of
was the
time?
total accretion rate as a function of time.
Okay.
Going from that to luminosity is something I think is really, really hard to do. There, this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you have some intuition as to why the like high Eddington ratios is preferably found in mass ratios closer to 1. Is it because like there's more symmetry in the system, so the accretion, it's easier for gas to flow in order.
So are you asking why is there a shift in the distribution?
Yeah, that this drop off.
Okay, so this drop off here is really because these lower mass ratio systems have accreted enough to become higher mass ratio systems. So basically, you just get more of the higher mass ratio systems. There is also, if you actually notice this, there's overall a decrease in systems overall, but that's because their evolution is sped up by the Circumbinary disk accretion. Yeah, but overall, the median is just growing because the Circumbinary disk favors accretion onto the lower mass black hole, therefore shifting the mass ratio up, and we just have fewer of the low mass ratio systems. Does that make sense?
I don't know if that's the same thing. So why is I'm confused if that's the same thing as why these equal mass binaries accrete at a higher rate.
Oh, okay. So are you asking about these Eddington?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So they're all accreting all of these systems are accreting at the same rate. So in this dark green population here, all of these systems across this parameter space are accreting at the same rate. What the y-axis here tells you is just how many of them there are.
Yeah.
Right?
So, but why is there this drop off? Like, why are equal mass systems bad at accreting at low Eddington ratios? Like, is that
I think it's the other way around. I think you're assuming some Eddington equation, and which then makes systems tend towards more equal mass. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we're assuming some Eddington accretion, and then the lower mass ratio systems evolve to become higher mass ratio systems.
Nice.
And by the time we're seeing them in these bands here, which are just giving you a certain frequency range, most of the lower mass ratio systems have evolved to become high mass ratio systems. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed it down if you showed it. So you showed the PTA, the characteristic strain. You showed the effect of changing the mass ratios. Did you show the effect of the eccentricity on the?
There is a very, very small effect of this.
Oh,
So the eccentricity, if it's extremely high, can lead to a turnover,
Right.
but this is not.
Even with, because you showed these two curves of eccentricity and it was like orders of magnitude more, but it's
Yeah.
still a low eccentricity.
It's still low eccentricity. So Luke Kelly had a few papers on this, and I think he showed that you need like a 0.99 eccentricity
Okay.
to see a significant turnover. So that's one of the reasons we did this analysis, because we were curious whether eccentricity could have some impact on the spectrum in itself. But no, it's really more of a multi-messenger thing that this affects. Yeah. All right.
By multi-messenger, I mean non-gravitational wave.
Yeah, so we see the gravitational wave background, but to infer anything about the eccentricity, we need to see demonstrated transient series. Yeah.
Okay, let's thank Magda again.